How do you feel as you move through the world? I mean, you are someone who uh, loves the topic of identity. It's come up a number of times already in this conversation, one of the themes. And, it's a kind of a weird question to ask or answer, but like, how do you feel as you move through the world? Like I feel like a man, I feel like an Indian, I feel like an American. There's so many different things. I'm a Pisces. I don't really identify much as a Pisces, even though I am. What are the ones that resonate with you about yourself where you're going, yeah, that's primarily what I lead with?
I mean, that's a great question because I think, it's interesting when you grow up in a place that where you're not from, in terms of the, culture, the dominant religion, you're an expat. I think there's you have the capacity to kind of really find, a certain comfort in home where you are, and you kind of land and absorb. I don't know how to describe it, but I used this analogy with some friends the other day. So perhaps it's this. It's
Mm.
not necessarily how I move through life, but maybe my general attitude. And unfortunately, I will say the lotus flower seems to have been co-opted by the very right-wing Hindu government in India right now. But I do think that, like a lotus, you are floating in a river, but you do have roots.
Mm.
And the roots can attach to different banks or branches or places where it needs to find a place at that moment. But then, when the currents change, it's going to move again. So I
Mm.
think my way of moving in the room has a sense of openness. And I'm not necessarily thinking about myself, really. I'm just, in terms of my identity in those moments, I'm going and I'm actually really kind of absorbing and then reacting based on where those conversations or those interactions lie. Because I'm reacting based on how someone is perceiving me. And I know who I am,
Mhm.
but it's like, but I'm not necessarily in that moment, like, being like, I'm South Asian, I'm a woman, I'm this. I'm really just a person in the world in this moment right now.
Yeah, that's
I
good.
mean, but it'll be somebody else who'll remind me of my gender,
Mhm.
frankly,
Mhm.
unless I'm on my period. It'll be someone else who'll tell me, like, you know, like say something that makes me self-conscious about the color of my skin,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know?
Mhm. It'll come externally as opposed to something that you're
Yeah.
bringing in internally. Uh, Tell me about a nightmare client or a hell gig that you've had. Names are optional.
I mean, I just remember I was asked to produce a project in China and then direct a project in India for a
Mm.
huge brand. And there were these short docs. And it was for a Women's Day, International Women's Day campaign. And I was tasked with doing a short doc as the director in India on a young Muslim woman based near Hyderabad who was a martial arts expert and was doing I think it was Taekwondo and was like a double black belt or something like
Mm.
that, and was also training, and that was the feature. And I had been asked to, get in find her, to get that process started. And I was so excited about her
Yeah.
telling her story, and I very quickly found her. And I remember actually reaching out to a filmmaker who had done a short or had done another project that she had been involved in. And now I was doing this branded piece, and that filmmaker was very upset that I was doing this and refused to give me the girl's information, sadly. But I could understand there's some people who, I mean, look, I was not the one who picked this person. I was just doing my job. But I then, was able to get in contact with this young woman. She was so excited about it. And then I got told by the brand, as we were like putting the logistics together of the planning, I booked my ticket. We had budgeted for this entire thing. Our shoot was already in production in China. And my colleague, Rachel, who was in China producing it at the time, had told me, like, hey, Shruti, there's some virus outbreak that everyone's talking about here, but I'm not, so I'm still, I was thinking of staying for a few more days, but I'm going to change my flight. And I was like, sure, get out of there, whatever you're saying. And then in the meantime, I'm about to fly to India, and I get told by the brand, we don't want to do that girl's story anymore. Like, there's been a direction shift, and we, want to do someone else. And I was like, you have made me reach out to this young Muslim girl who's doing martial arts, and she's training it as a matter of self-defense in a time where Muslims and Muslim women are really feeling, you know,
Attacked.
are feeling attacked. And I, with my Hindu, Hindu name, even though I'm like half Hindu, is I'm essentially going to be the messenger to tell this girl that her story is not important. And I don't want to do that. That's horrible. I said, this goes against everything that your campaign is about. It goes against everything I do. And with your permission, whatever we decide to do together or not, I want to tell her story because I don't want her to feel like her story doesn't matter. Now, whether you run it or not, that's fine, but I will make a film for her. And they weren't sure about it. I mean, I was going to do it anyway, but then that thing called the pandemic had happened, and I wasn't going to be traveling for the next several months anyway. And
Yeah.
that became the reason for why it didn't continue. But I remember just here is a brand that continuously builds campaigns around these things, and I felt like it was real smoke and mirrors because I was going through this experience, and I was like, you guys are full of shit.
Yeah. That's maybe that was God's way of descending and saying, well, I'm going to save Shruti from this, like she's done such a good job of like carrying the spirit on. She's going to tell the story. You know what? I'm going to let you out of this. We're going to, some people
Yeah.
may be affected, but we're
and
going to
and,
get
and
you out
you're
of this.
she also and it was God's way of saying like, look, I'm going to send a pandemic so you can get stuck in Oslo and spend the most time with your husband than you've ever had.
You guys are still together. That's good. Not
That was
everybody
it.
made it, dude. Not everybody made it. Oh my gosh, that's definitely good. Do you have a great story, something involving preferably a celebrity? I'm sure you've got to have some good stories.
Oh gosh, how many names do you want me to drop?
Look, just this is the section of the interview where you could just drop names like bombs. Just go to town.
Oh God. So I'll never forget this friend of mine, Maria Zuckerman, was on the jury of Tribeca one year, and she said, Shroots, why don't you come to the opening screening with me? It's a incredible documentary about music and human rights. I said, oh, it sounds perfect. And then she said, oh, actually, there's an opening party just before just before that, because De Niro is being given the keys to this city. And I was like, cool, even though, it's by a mayor I don't like or respect very much, Eric Adams. So I went with Maria to this event, and I ran into a lot of friends I knew, and I ran into Janet Yang, who's the president of the Academy. And Janet was chatting with us, and I said, oh gosh, there's Brendan Fraser. And she's like, oh, do you want to say hi to him? Let me bring him over. So she brings him over. So we're just chatting with Brendan Fraser and his
With the
very
whale.
lovely son.
Yeah.
He had just won for the whale.
Yeah.
And so then I was like, wait, is that Matt Damon? It was a small room of
Gosh.
it was like 60 people at this thing. It was not big. And Janet's like, oh, there's Matt. Let's go say hi to him. And she grabs me. We go just chat with him. And then, we lose each other because we run into other friends. And then she comes back and is like, Shruti, I've heard, Julian Schnabel, which is not really true, but we have common friends. And so she dragged me. She's like, you have to introduce me to Julian Schnabel. And I was like, okay. Literally, this woman can go say hi to everybody because
Yeah,
everyone
right.
knows who she is.
Right.
But I love that Janet's asking me to do this for her. So we're walking around and there's no sign of Julian, but who is standing there but Kenneth Lonergan, the playwright and filmmaker, and Mark Ruffalo. And, she's like, Janet Yang. And I was like, oh, Kenneth, Mark. And then I say, hello to them. Janet introduces me. And then at that moment, Scorsese is walking by and he's like, Kenny, Mark. And they're like, Marty. And they like hug each other. And he's like, hey, Marty. I was like, hi, Shruti. And, he's walking away. And then Mark Ruffalo looks at me and is like, I know you. And I said, yes, about, I don't know, 11 years ago, right out of grad school, I directed some videos for the Brain Tumor Foundation, and I made a video with you
Wow.
and he said, I remember that video. I remember our shoot.
No way.
And yeah, I mean, it was a little video, and it was the first time I guess he was telling his story. Um, and he said that video changed my life. And I totally remembered it. And he sent me such a sweet message, about, my approach, that he had been scared to share his story with the world at that time. Even then he was already playing the Hulk. Um, and I remember in the message, he was like, your kindness and your compassion made it really easy for me to open up. And I hadn't seen him, been in touch with him. And then 11 years later in a crowded room with a lot of recognizable people in this very funny context. He's like, I remember you. He's like, why do I know you? And it's been so nice because, we've been able to reconnect as friends, and that's been wonderful. So that's like a celeb story, but I think, someone like, it's wonderful that the entertainment business gets to have people like Mark Ruffalo in the world because, he's a real one.
That's amazing. I mean, I listened to this podcast called The Rewatchables, and they do spotlight in it. And one of the comments they make is this should not be a rewatchable movie. It's such a heavy topic, but because of the acting in it, the writing, the way the story is told, it is a movie I've seen maybe 4 or 5 times. I mean, I was watching The Founder yesterday again with Michael Keaton. I just have movies on in the background sometimes. I love Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson. If you ever meet Jack Nicholson, he's my one guy that I want to meet. So, but did you meet De Niro then?
I feel like I've met De Niro before, but not, I don't think I met him that night. Yeah.
What a good problem to have. You're like, oh, Bobby, yeah. Like I think Bobby and Joe, like we talked to them for a while, but yeah, Marty, it's just I don't know if it was that night. We had a lot going on. I was talking to Mark, so Mark and Matt. That's amazing. Wow. Super, super cool stuff.